Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which I'm sad to report is still deeply wrapped in a pandemic. It's easy for us in the United States to get our comfort factor up, but I just checked the statistics this morning, and on a planet of 7.8 billion people, more than 7 billion people are yet to see one shot, let alone two. That's an unbelievable statistic. This is a virus that knows no bounds. We're in a globally connected economy and societies interlaced all the time. So we're not remotely dealing with this virus yet. The vaccine inequity is dominating vaccine equity and access. But today we're going to talk about another category of living thing, plants. And they get short shrift, as my old friend Peter Raven used to lament a lot when we worked together at National Geographic Society. We tend to focus on living things. We think of the animals around us. Just this morning, I was taking some video of a millipede amid the plants, as opposed to looking at the plants. So I wanted to start. We've got great guests here, 3 generations of wonderful leaders in both education and basic inquiry on plants. But I'm going to start with a little scene from Hubbard Trail here in the Hudson Valley, the Hudson Highlands, Lenape scene. I can't play the sound right now for complicated reasons, but this is my neck of the woods, literally.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And something about water and gravity and botany is worth just reveling in sometimes. I wish you could hear it too, but just a little technical glitch. So there we were this morning, my wife and I, immersed in plants. I'm sure there's at least several non-native species there as well. Have to get used to that. So this morning, I'm with Peter Raven, who is one of the true pioneers and deans of modern botany. He co-wrote one of the seminal textbooks. He's worked. He grew up all around the world. He studied all around the world. He's one of the leading conservationists of our time. Hilary Callahan, who's the chair of the biology department at Barnard, deeply rooted in plant science, as you'll learn in a second, and Angelica Patterson, who, congratulations, Angelica, just got her PhD. She survived that review with a dissertation. I think Hilary might have been involved in that. And
Oh, yeah.
who is suitably titled a master educator at Black Rock Forest here in the Hudson River Valley, this amazing Lenape territory. We all are honored to have modern life on a landscape that's been tended for thousands of years by predecessors. Peter, I assume you're in Missouri at home?
Yes, I'm at home sitting across from my desk in part of the kitchen. I've been getting into the office much for the past year, I'll tell you.
Yeah. And Hilary, where are you? Are you in New York City?
I am, and I'm not on the Barnard campus. This is actually, even not during a pandemic, May is a time when I tend to work a lot at home because I can sort of, transition between academic year and summer. And I live in the Bronx. I'm very proud of that. And I'm in Marble Hill, right near the Hudson River, where the Harlem River Chip Canal meets up with the Hudson River. So I'm not too far away from the water. We can catch a breeze, and it's great. But I'm on the mainland.
Do you sneak over to the Botanical Garden on occasion?
Yeah, so I'm a 15-minute bike ride from the Botanical Garden, and I've actually done a lot of work with them in the last couple of years, and I also just love to go visit.
That's great. So we're here partially to discuss this fantastic new book that Peter has written, Driven by Nature. I mean, Peter, and you'll learn there's multiple meanings to that. At least I take multiple meanings to that.
Which they didn't have at the New York Botanical Garden gift shop, but I ordered it, so they are going to get. Now they know.
Now they know. Wow. So anyway, hold on one second, because I want to show a little bit of a video that Peter's received many accolades and honors, but a couple of years ago, he got the Hubbard Medal from National Geographic Society, which is a very auspicious honor. And there's a 2-minute video that I think is very much worth seeing. Let me just be sure I get this right so you can actually hear it. And here we go.
I think connection is the only thing that has the power of change. If we gain knowledge ourselves and become connected with others, then we really do have a chance to move forward. Plants really provide the backbone for the entire Earth, creating our atmosphere, holding it constant. We're adapted to that kind of a living system. Deforestation as a cause of extinction really only came into view in about the 1960s. We weren't talking about the possible extinction of some species. We were talking about a massive extinction of life. To try to prevent that by preserving them is of extreme importance for the future. Missouri Botanical Garden has had a very large effect on plant exploration around the world. When I arrived in 1971, there were only about a half a dozen people in the research program. Now there are about 50 PhDs in a research program that has been active on every continent as a way to build connections with people. Would the wonderful set of senses that we've evolved over the years mean anything in a world made up completely of robots and gray walls? No. We belong to nature. Nature is not something we go out into. Nature is something we live in all the time. The reason that we're on Earth is to understand one another, to impart knowledge to one another. Together, over the last 10,000 years, we've created the beauties of our civilization. If we fail to appreciate, love, and care for one another, all of those accomplishments will be lost. There's really no other reason for us to be on Earth but to preserve and to enjoy it. My name is Dr. Peter Raven. The purpose of my life is to try to inspire others to work together to save this planet with all of its glory.
Bravo.
Yeah, very nice.
And I think some of that spirit has spilled over into, again, the two generations who are sharing the screen with us today. Hilary, Callahan, I didn't know, I still haven't been to it, that Barnard has a greenhouse on the roof there, and has a plant that one of these great, that plant from Indonesia that
the corpse flower. Yeah.
The corpse flower. Yeah, actually, I was going to show something of that too. But can you describe your journey? Peter is going to get into his journey through this botany to conservation. But Hilary, could you just describe briefly how you became who you are so far?
Yeah, sure. I'm very much a botanist, and I grew up in Massachusetts in a fairly rural, I would call a semi-rural area, a small town called Ayer, Massachusetts. And my mom was a teacher, elementary and kindergarten teacher. And my mom's family are all nature lovers, right? So I kind of grew up being one of these kids who's out in the woods and whose grandparents and uncles would, it's like, what are you going to do today with your grandparents? You're going to go on a hike and you're going to learn about plants or streams or fish or insects or spiders and, the constellations. And I wound up going to Yale for my undergrad, and after trying my hand in big city, New York City life, decided I didn't want to be a New York City media mogul. I was very happy to leave that all behind. I was telling Andy that he and I lived in New York City at the same time in Park Slope in the late 80s. But I went to the University of Wisconsin thanks to my undergrad mentor, Arthur Galston, who was a really inspiring plant physiologist at Yale. And he gave me a long list of places to apply. And at the very end, he said, maybe you should go to the University of Wisconsin's botany department, because I told him I wanted to study ecology. And he was right. That's where I wound up going. And I got my PhD there in the botany department, another place with a beautiful greenhouse. I've done postdoctoral work in Tennessee. I got on this Arabidopsis model organism just around the time that the human genome was being sequenced. The first plant genome was being sequenced, and I jumped on that bandwagon. It was the one time in my life when I actually listened to my advisor. He said, "This is going to be the next big thing." And he was right. And I still continue to work on that system with my students at Barnard College, where I've been for 22 years. But my real passion at Barnard, I mean, I'm the token botanist, not only in my biology department, where I teach undergrads about plants and ecology and evolutionary biology, but I'm also I call myself the Lorax, the Barnard Lorax. I'm the go-to person. Any question about any plant on a plate, on the sidewalk, on a windowsill, is something that I get questions about all the time. And we do have this fantastic greenhouse, which goes back to the very founding of Barnard College, almost 130 years ago, or more than 130 years ago. It basically, the dirty little secret is it was founded because New York City women who were not going to college weren't going to college because they wanted to study botany. And not very many colleges had good programs to study botany. And they all went to Barnard because Barnard was able to deliver that important goal. So it's been a real honor to teach botany there because it's such a really long tradition. And it's also really wonderful to be so close to Lamont, to Columbia University, and to other New York City institutions like all the botanical gardens. There's one in every borough except Manhattan. And I like to think of Barnard's campus as the fifth botanical garden.
Wow. Who has been able to tend to those plants through the lockdown?
Yeah, our greenhouse manager, Nick Gershberg, who is really talented and talk about inspiring, he was really doing it single-handedly with a couple other staff members. And he's the one full-time person there. There's a lot of students and then other staff in the biology department help out. It's a big job. A lot of it is automated, but you can never automate, like you were saying, Peter, in that video. Robots can only do so much. There has to be that relationship, that true relationship between the plants and their caregivers.
Victoria Johnson has written a terrific book on David Hosack, who was a botanist on Manhattan at a time when the first greenhouses were founded. And now, by the way, she's working on one on Aaron Burr, who turns out to have been quite a major botanist. So we'll see whether his love for plants can in some way excuse his otherwise completely unforgivable crimes.
Which occurred right where I live. Oop.
Uh-huh.
That's another great botanical legacy at Columbia that I love to remind people about.
I'm not sure if you can still hear me. My camera seems to have just fuzzed
We
out.
can hear you, Andy.
Good. Well, you don't have to see my visage. But yeah, Aaron Burr, I live in Garrison, Cold Spring area of the Hudson Valley, and this is where he was doing his thing. So speaking of the Hudson Valley, Angie Patterson, Colorful Side Girl as your moniker on Twitter, which I can add to the screen here.
Yeah.
You've been on this show before, and you've described a little bit of your experience, but sort of if you could give a thumbnail sketch of how you became who you are so far, and everything is a journey, that'd be awesome. I'm sorry. And here's your new website. It's theshotgunscientist.com.
Yeah, I figured I'd steal that domain before someone else did. So yeah, no, my journey, it didn't start off with plants. I had aspirations to become a veterinarian. Like many, kids, I guess that look like me, they're really pushed to be a lawyer or a doctor, some type of profession like that. And but my parents were pretty supportive of me, and I loved animals at the time, so I went to Cornell. And I had as a first generation student, with minimal advisement in the beginning, just really did horrible my first year. And I was kind of searching my soul, and taking as many different classes as possible. I happened to take a conservation biology course to make up for a failed biology course that I did, and that kind of opened my eyes to how the world works. I loved that there was no right answer. I was horrible at those absolute maths, like, you have to proof these equations and things like that. And I just like the science of asking questions and discovering what's there. So yeah, that's when that field kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities. And working in the library system, I guess really helped with my skills in research. And I just took one opportunity after another, work study with the plant cryobiology lab. Really saw how researchers worked, with test tubes and things like that. And then I ended up taking care of the plants at the Cornell greenhouses. And that was just really, really cool and transformative and peaceful. Plants don't talk back, so it's very nice to think a lot when you're around them. So yeah, and then I just took opportunity after opportunity, ended up in working in Dr. Allison Powers' lab in the ecology department over there, studying plant diseases in Kansas grasses. And then I did a brief stint in Arizona, studying Sonita moth and the Sonita cactus, their mutualistic relationship. And then Hilary was the first post-baccalaureate job I had after undergrad, and she welcomed me to the city, and that's when I got exposed to, plant phenotypic plasticity and urban ecology. So I thought that was really cool. And then from there, I just formed relationships and stumbled upon Kevin Griffin's lab at Columbia University, where I graduated with the plant ecophysiology knowledge I have now.
Yeah. So getting to the shotgun briefly before we get into Peter's book,
Sure.
My first real deep immersion with botanists was in the Amazon rainforest with Doug Daly. Doug Daly from the New York Botanical Garden. I was writing a book about the murder of Chico Mendes, a Brazilian rubber tapper who was slain by cattle ranchers in 1989. And I was going down this trail in the middle of nowhere in Acre with Doug Daly, and I was looking at these different tree trunks, and I said, "What species is this?" And he would say, "Well, I can't tell you that unless I go way up there." He said, "The flowers and the fruits are all up." And you'd see this litter of flower petals and leaves on the forest floor, and the idea. And also, he said, I would point to a tree, and he'd say, "I have no idea. The species here are so abundant that." So the idea of the mystery of botany too, the lack of basic understanding became clear to me there. And he had those can't remember what you call those sort of sawtooth shaped things you could put on your legs, and he would climb up the trees. And so a shotgun obviously is another way to harvest the fruits and flowers from way up high, I assume.
Yeah. It's very effective. It's efficient. It's inexpensive and fun. So
some have used monkeys. Some have used trained monkeys.
Yeah.
And some, especially in Indonesia, have used specially trained people who love to go up and get the stuff for them. But it is a real challenge, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's even a working group being formed to really get a lot of the plant scientists who work and collect data from the canopy level to kind of figure out if there's develop more efficient ways to get accurate data often, because going up to the canopy is it could be time consuming, and so they're even coming up with robotics, developing things that can maybe climb the trunk to get to. Yeah, no, it's pretty impressive, and they have drones now that can cut down branches. So technology is helping.
I was talking with Peter.
There, you've got to sort of mark all the trees and identify every one too. And,
right.
Yeah.
Do you remember 3 years ago or so, there was a botanist when I was still at National Geographic Society who was seeking support to get. He studies these water plants that only live in waterfalls.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I was talking about the use of a drone with an articulating arm to maybe pluck those. I guess we have to circle back to that. It sounds like
Podocarpaceae, they're called, and they have leaves under the running water, and then when it dries up enough, they come up and flower in big masses. I wanted to mention one thing about New York, though. Another book, Tony Hiss, Rescuing the Planet, Protecting the Land to Heal the Earth. If the New York Botanical Garden doesn't have that in their bookstore, I'll kill them, because it totally deals with the idea of how to reforest and who's reforesting and what the big projects are, dividing the natural and the urban around. And New York is one of the big examples in there. And I think you all and almost anybody listening to this program in the area would love to read that excellent book, Tony Hiss, Hiss, Rescuing the Planet.
We will. I'm writing it down. I'll tweet it later.
Forward by E.O. Wilson, so it must be all right.
I think Ed Wilson has something to say in your book too. Oops, sorry, I was trying to show your book cover. Let me. I was trying to show your book cover, and some glitchy thing just happened, which seems to happen too much in these days we have online. I'll show it in a couple minutes. But Peter, let's get into the book. Is essentially your life, and driven by nature. Anyone who knows Peter knows he is driven to dig at these problems like global conservation, like making sure plants are in the foreground, not in the background. And could you give a brief sketch of how, I know it's a whole book's worth of how you became you, but what's the driving force in you? What is it that wakes you up or keeps you up late at night, Peter?
Well, the night I was born, it was a warm night in Shanghai. No. I want to do whatever I can to get people around the world to love one another enough to care about collectively saving the sustainability of our planet. It's extremely tough because of the extraordinary greed of those of us wealthy. And talking about making America great again is a form of saying, push the poor people farther into their holes. The problem is we manage this planet all together. If we all consumed, if all the nations in the world and all the people consumed at the level that we do in the United States, it would take 5 planets to support us sustainably. That is, to make enough food here to support us. So making us greater and greater has real consequences. I very strongly recommend the Global Footprint Network website, Global Footprint Network, which really tells how unbalanced this all is and demonstrates clearly using UN statistics that by the middle of each year, we've passed the sustainable possibilities for the Earth. So we are clearly driving ourselves into a hole, partly in a big way by global climate change, which we're not dealing with even remotely adequately, but in an even more fundamental way by biological extinction. And to solve any of that, we need to be international. We need to empower women and children. We need to live much more sustainably here at home. And there are many things we can do, and I'm sure we'll get into some of them as we go along.
I'm just showing the website. I know the folks who came up with this concept. The word footprint has gotten, some environmentalists are attacking it these days because they posit that it's making this feel too much about our individual actions and not enough about the institutions and power centers that are driving deforestation. But I think
academics have a way of yakking. Academics have a way of yakking forever, don't they?
Yeah.
What I like about everyone in this conversation is you have gotten out of what some people call faculty lounge speak. There's been a thing on James Carville, the political analyst, if you go on Twitter, you'll see recently he was talking about that's just faculty lounge talk.
Yeah.
People don't talk that way. So none of you talk that way. So
I can tell you what we used to say when I was at Stanford when we were talking about problems like this. Let's go down to the garage, lock the door, idle the motor, and discuss this further.
Yeah. But yeah, I love that. I love that footprint concept and that particular resource that you were just showing, Andy. Like when we teach introductory biology at Barnard, we use that. And, I think the students really like it. I personally really like it because it's not in currency. It's in the units are Earths, right? So it asks you your footprint and it's like, how many Earths are you using? And, Earth is not an institution, right? I mean, we can change ourselves and we can have an impact on the Earth. In between those two things are the institutions. And, that is important to remember. The institutions, though, are the middlemen. And, but I really love that the currency is how many Earths are you using up with.
All of those calculations are based on UN statistics, each one of which is fully justified. So if anybody wants to argue with it, welcome to it. You can also use their website for calculating how much you use as a family, how you can make that go up or down, how much you use as Barnard College, how much you use as Metro New York or the Bronx or whatever.
I agree. And visualizations generally tend to be able to capture things in ways we don't really understand, can't really fully grasp. I love the work of Adam Neiman, who's an illustrator of Earth concepts and scale, who I featured on .earth way back in 2010. And this is on the left, all the world's liquid water, if you put it in a sphere. Not a lot. And that sort of says a lot without a lot of words. And the other sphere, of course, is the atmosphere. If you peel it off of the Earth, that's the air that we all share. And these are great ways to kind of build conversations. And as Peter just said, come up with a different way to visualize it if you have a different approach, like who owns that space? Is it corporations or people, and who does the work? Those are all really important points. Yeah. So Peter, we kind of diverted slightly from your track. You said you really effectively described what drives you. Right now, let's talk about plants particularly. Is there a way, do you, when we were at National Geographic, I think, as you said, if you look at cover stories or whatever, plants got short shrift, I think, historically. And they still, I just had a peanut butter sandwich with blueberries and it was all plants. And, we don't really.
I'm eating celery.
Oh, there you go. All very low calorie.
I got into botany because I thought it was so important, and I made the choice between botany and entomology when I was a junior at Berkeley. If you consider that we are part of, as I said in that little film clip you put in from the Geographic, if you point out that we evolved within the global biosphere, the functioning ecosystem that supports us all, and we're a member of it, we depend completely and totally on its proper functioning for our own survival and our own ability to develop things like what we call civilization. The Earth has evolved over 4.5 billion years, and during the course of that time, the antecedents of chloroplasts, the blue-green algae, the bacteria that put oxygen into the atmosphere, changed the character of our whole atmosphere to what it is now, 20% oxygen, and plants evolving about 150 million years ago and developing on the Earth when it was safe from ultraviolet radiation to come up on land. Plants developed these complex ecosystems that totally support the atmosphere that we breathe, the soils that we use, the circulation and management of water, and very important in global warming, pollution. And plants are responsible for all of that. They're the background of ecosystems. We must understand and support them. when we were at the Geographic, I used to imagine a pangolin wandering around alone on a wood floor of a gym somewhere and what it would ultimately do. I mean, there is no life without plants, but there's no life without the whole ecosystems being supported, and plants as a background are ultra necessary. We get all of our food from plants, directly or indirectly. That ought to make us think a bit. More than half the people in the world use plants directly for their medicines. India and China being leaders in that. If you go to the drugstore, about a quarter of all the pharmaceuticals that you get are from plants or originally from plants, and another quarter are from bacteria and fungi. So our dependence on plants, the importance that they have for us, and the role that they play in maintaining the ecosystems which allow us to survive and develop the things we do here, is incredibly high, and we really ought to be encouraging more study and more information about them and the way they work together. And Hilary is doing a particularly good job in one way of exploring that. And I hope she might say a little bit about some of the things that interest her.
Yeah.
Over to you.
I mean, I really appreciate that. And, you know, I've been at Barnard for a long time, and I have sort of, you know, I have a visibility there because I think people do love having a beautiful campus and, you know, having beautiful surroundings, even in a city. And we do have kind of a beautiful little jewel on the Upper West Side. But I think what a lot of people
because you're obviously a very nice and open, welcoming person. That helps a lot too, Hilary.
I try not to like wow them with too many botanical terminologies. You know, I try to like, meet them in the middle. But one thing, you know, for years, what you were saying about plants being, you know, so foundational to sustaining us for food and all of our fuels and so many other built materials, pharmaceuticals. I think a lot of people know that, but they don't have a very sophisticated perspective on it. And a lot of what I've been pushing, you know, over the years, and I'm now finally starting to make progress, is this idea of like turning our campus into like a living laboratory and a living botanical garden. And so that we're not just having a lawn because we have a lawn, but, you know, really being more thoughtful about it. And so, you know, two things that I've come up with lately in that is that for years I resisted, like people were always like, let's grow food. You know, we planted rooftop gardens, we planted the grounds, and people are always like, can we grow food? Can we have a mini farm on campus? And I always kind of hated that because I thought it was so unrealistic. It's like, listen, there's, you know, over 2,500 students here. There's all the faculty and staff. You're not going to grow enough food here to feed everybody. That's silly. It shows like how little they know. And lately I've been kind of turned 180 degrees back around because I do want to have a demonstration garden on campus because a lot of people want to know, I want to eat local, right? Because they're starting to understand that growing plants nearby to eat and growing plants nearby to use for building materials makes a lot more sense and is more just than pillaging the rainforest tens of thousands of miles away or shipping you know, fresh fruits that are tropical from, you know, Latin America. And that, you know, that's just causing so many problems economically, in terms of sustainability, in terms of oppressing the people who are extracting those resources and shipping them out of their own economy into the US economy. And so I'm really excited about the idea of like, yeah, you know that I'm wearing my kale t-shirt for a reason today. You know, I want to grow kale on campus. I used to be so against that because I thought people would be disappointed when they realized that, you know, there's enough kale there for maybe a couple of luncheons, but not for like the whole student body all winter long. But if people realize that you can grow food, I mean, the Dan Barber's work up in Potantico Hills showing that like you can produce fresh food year round. We have a farmer's market year round. People are starting to be aware of that. So I want to really bring that home and help people develop that more realistic, nuanced sophistication about like, oh, I get it. You know, I live in a city that has a lot of benefits. because you can minimize your carbon footprint by living in a high density city, but you have to manage the city really intelligently to bring it even further down. So, you know, one thing I try to tell people is when I was a kid, it was always like, yeah, overpopulation, right? And Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb. And there's been all these conservatives who have said like, well, see, he was wrong because not, you know, only 10% of the things have gone extinct instead of all of them. And, you know, I'm kind of like, well, you're right. In a way, we've made progress. We've mitigated that disaster, which shows that the disaster is mitigatable.
Yeah.
So let's work harder. And I think we can get to zero net carbon. I think, you know, we've made a lot of strides. So, I mean, I think that helps to give the optimism too, instead of the doom and gloom. Like we're doing really a lot better than we once thought, but we have a long way still to go.
We do. Well, that's an interesting point that when you can illustrate something, you're also illustrating the limits of it, and that can engage students or anybody on the bigger picture. Well, what do we do to have kale at scale? Yeah. Kale scale.
Yeah, that's great. I think like as a plant ecophysiologist, you know, we often point out how important the rubisco enzyme is. It's the most abundant enzyme probably in the world, and how important it is to understand its function and understand its function across all the different species here, and the consequences of human impact and climate change on just the ability for plants to grow and feed us and sustain us and provide these ecosystem services. And, you know, in my work, I study that. I study how these trees are responding physiologically to climate change in the context of changing forests, tree migration, altering the forest composition, the vegetative communities, which sets the foundation for what can live in a system, and how carbon the fluxes can change from region to region, and especially in the Northeast, which is critically important in offsetting a lot of the carbon that the U.S. Produces annually. So all of this is super relevant, and you can even get to, you know, our relationship with nature, but also what we're doing to mitigate that policy, even down to subsidizing farms. You know, a lot of that money goes to meat production, and how that can really devastate a lot of our land.
And it goes to waste.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, Peter, I'm kind of curious how Peter got so passionate about the tropics, because Angie and I are we're like such temperate buffs, right? Like we love our temperate deciduous forest here in the Northeast,
which I'm showing right now via one of Angie's videos. The 360
and
video.
I mean, the only tropical forests I've really been to are in the Caribbean. I haven't actually ever been to Latin America or Southeast Asia, but I'm curious about how you got into that, Peter.
Well, more than 2/3 of all the species of organisms in the world live in the tropics. And we probably, leaving out bacteria, which God knows how many species there are, it's impossible. We probably named fewer than 10% of tropical organisms at present. We've named there may be something like 10 million kinds of organisms other than bacteria, maybe 20. And we've named 2 million of them. So basically, we don't know what it is that we're driving to extinction, and our chance of ever seeing them is disappearing during our lifetimes. And that's a very serious responsibility. We need to build sustainability everywhere. But if you take that rich tropical forest that I just talked about, since the Convention on Biological Diversity was ratified 26 years ago, 1/4 of all tropical forests have been cut. And given the poverty there, they're going to be cut. There are very few people who expect that any substantial tropical forest will be left by the end of this century. And that being the case, we have an enormous responsibility to try to find out what's there, to try to reach balance there and to try to affect the lives of the people who live there. Now, global warming, if we don't get control of what we're doing to warm the climate of the world, most people calculate that we'll pass the point of no return at the end of this decade, 9 years from now. Certainly, most people predict that no matter what we do, California won't be able to grow the crops that they grow there now. The Midwest won't be able to grow corn and soybeans, and the whole structure of agriculture will change in the next decade. And yet we're unwilling, because of our selfishness, to turn our attention fully to that climate change. And of course, it's a major driving factor in extinction. About 20% of all organisms are expected to become extinct over the next couple of decades, and maybe twice that by the end of the century. And remember that most of those will never even be seen. So obviously it's good to be optimistic and do what we can do, keep doing what we can do, particularly in a very rich and over-consuming country like the United States. We need to face facts and get onto it. And climate change is one thing that we can't avoid. And most people think we need to do something about climate change, and yet we're not anywhere near where we need to be. If we don't, we're 1.1 degrees Celsius over the background warmth now. We'll estimate to be 1.5 at the end of the decade, which is calculated to be the point of no return. And if we don't get a better grip then, we're calculated to be 2.3 to 2.7 within about 25 years. That will set forth huge extinction worldwide and major migration of people and displacement of agriculture and all the rest, and cannot be ignored. And the United States, although we have a hard time facing it because we want to have it all for ourselves, must be a leader in that if it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask you all is about turning points. Turning points in your understanding of the sustainability question relating to plants and climate and the like. And one of the ones I want to pose for Peter is, I think, Peter, you and I, anyone who, old enough, grew up in the mid to late 20th century with the idea that we need to get people out of the landscapes to save them. And yet here's a great example from the Amazon showing you that people on the lands are can be a huge force for guardianship. Here, the Xingu Preserve in the Amazon shows you vividly through satellite imagery that the inhabited Amazon, when it's in this case indigenous, is a place that's conserved from the amazing deforestation rates around it. So that feels like that narrative really is only now emerging, Peter. And I didn't know if you agree that that's become more of a dominant, sense of things, of getting people out of nature is not necessarily the path to sustainability.
Absolutely. We're part of nature. We evolved in the global ecosystem. Very few people think the world could support more than 1/4 of its present population people sustainably, but we have no option but to live with nature. And of course, some of that, particularly in Africa, becomes kind of a hobby thing where we demand that other people maintain parks because we like them so well, and the leopards and lions can live there in peace and happiness. But we need to live with nature. We need to reduce our numbers in order to be able to do that successfully. I refer again to Tony Hiss's great book about the United States and trying to make designs where we'll live with nature, HISS. And that is very definitely what we have to. We don't have any choice. I mean, anything else, we're just kidding ourselves. One of the things that is just more than a little worrisome to me is that the United States is so incredibly rich, and yet we say we have this wonderful, successful park system. Well, how are we paying for this wonderful, successful park system, and where's the future of it? Not so easy.
Yeah.
By the way, I just wanted to mention the High Line in New York is a real fun example of where a lot of plants can be grown in a small area, and where it kind of not only makes that part of the city beautiful and interesting, but it also really shows by demonstration that foods and things can be grown too.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Well,
great.
Yeah. So for both Angie and Hilary, thinking about your careers or some shift that you made, or maybe just talking about cities as a solution, as you did, Hilary, earlier with food. Clearly, landscapes in cities can be more green too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I learned that lesson about people on the land as a grad student. And Peter Raven, I'm sure you remember Hugh Iltis, was a really important teacher in our botany department at Wisconsin. And he had ties to people down in Mexico. And I'm always teaching people about his great story about the relatives of corn that were thought to be extinct. And, he used to send his annual New Year's card that was sort of stylized as a botanical herbarium specimen. And he sent it out one year saying, this species is extinct. And his colleague, Luz Maria Villarreal de Puja down in University of Guadalajara put it on the board and wrote a sign and said, "Prove the gringo wrong," right? It's like my favorite story is that she told her students, and one of her students, Rafael Guzman, was like, "Oh, that grows near my parents' house." So he went and found it during his winter holidays, and it was discovered to still be, and that whole park now is a World Biosphere Reserve and sort of a demonstration project for how people can live in nature and with nature instead of having this extractive model. So that was early in my professional training, but I'm constantly teaching that to people and showing people that you can't carve out a line between that over there is for nature and this over here is for us humans, because it doesn't work that way. We are part of nature. And, so that was a really important lesson for me. And, but even just trying to think outside the box over the years, I always hung out with radical people and who would say things about, you got to check out agriculture in Cuba. And, I started reading about urban agriculture in Cuba, and it was really eye-opening. Now, are there problems in Cuba? Of course. But does the general principle require more investigation and more refinement? Absolutely. So those kinds of just really eye-opening lessons were really important to me. And I try to pass them along. Sometimes I'm just passing along the exact same lesson because it's so effective to hear some of these stories.
What was the name of the park, by the way?
Was our graduate, and of course I knew him very well. Came from
what
Washington.
was the corn?
You said there's a park. A park.
It's the Sierra de Manatlan.
On about third page of my book, I have a quote from him. Yeah. But the thing is, cities should grow in this combined way, but we have to remember that if all the cities were used efficiently for agriculture, you're talking about something like 3% of the food that people need.
Right.
In other words, it needs to be done, but it's not a big solution.
Yeah. But it makes our cities more livable.
Oh,
and I think having agriculture be invisible to people who live in cities is a problem. Yeah. We don't know where it came from. And your drinking water also being invisible. Most New Yorkers do not know that we're so dependent on our Northeast forests for that clean water, right? I mean, Angie, that's something you teach at Blackrock all the time.
Right. The water, yeah, exactly. I mean, in Blackrock itself has, 6, 7 reservoirs that supplies the drinking water for Cornwall. And super important.
And of course, that understanding is what it made possible to establish the Adirondack Park 140 years ago, which is a wonderful achievement in being a mixture of cities and urban things and wildland and forever preserved, and are really far ahead of its time as a project or as a level of understanding.
And also involving the indigenous people from the region, the few of them that are around, were also very supportive of that.
Right. Getting a better understanding where we came from, where we're going, leads to a better sense of where we go. And climate change, of course, means it's not all about looking back to inform the future, because you have to understand the whole system is in flux. Not to mention invasive species and the like. The landscape, maybe last, as we get toward the end here, let's chart paths forward. I'm just showing briefly, the Columbia's Urban Design Lab has a map that kind of gives people a sense of the food shed. In other words, for New Yorkers, there are other ways you can have a working garden in the city, but you can also have some kind of visualized capacity to understand your relationship to different kinds of foods that you rely on, like. So visualization can be helpful in charting paths forward. So Peter, I guess, in the book, there's the section that's forward looking. If you want someone like Alexandria Villaseñor, who's a 14-year-old climate activist who's been on this show many times. So she wakes up one morning in 2050 and things are better than we thought. Peter, what's the thing you're urging people to do that creates that better trajectory? What is the thing to do?
To me, the single thing that's most important is to take an international attitude and recognize the fact that we're on one planet, cut out some of our selfishness, and begin to love people actively who live in places like Africa and Asia and so forth. Without that, I don't think there is any solution. And we have so many people that we're headed for a kind of a crash. Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, which have 2.2 billion people now, is projected to have 1.1 billion people now, is projected to have 2.2 billion by mid-century, 4.4 billion by the end of the century. Now tell me what those people are going to eat.
Wow.
And yet these idiots keep saying, oh, they want a fertility dividend, or China is in terrible shape because they're not having young people. Apparently they think that if we have enough people in the world so that we're all standing shoulder to shoulder, everything will be all right. But international understanding and love is the most important thing that I know. Empowering women as a short term and children is extremely important worldwide, because not only is it immoral and unjust, but it means that we don't have the benefit of their brains in many cases to help us advance. Living in rich countries within our means, within the world's means, and thinking about it, getting our children abroad, those are all things that we could do that would make it better in 2050. But I think that if we don't put a halt on climate change, civilization is going to crash a lot faster than it would have otherwise. And in terms of being optimistic, we can always be more optimistic or less optimistic. But if we're more optimistic because we resolved ourselves to do everything in our power to make things better, then things will be better. That's all. They're going to be bad, but they'll be better. Let's do the best we can and not just sit there. I won't describe what we're sitting on, chairs.
Made of plants mostly.
Exactly.
I'm sitting on a wooden chair.
And Angie, you focus a lot on communication, and particularly on engaging and normalizing having people of color, black in nature, black in science, black in botany. A lot of what I see in that arena is about empathy and respect for a wider population than the one any particular person grew up in. Does that resonate with you, that idea of, we think about, we're all sort of science focused here, right?
Yeah.
But people like Peter bring up love and empathy all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, part of, experiencing nature in its natural spaces like the forest can be so disconnected with certain communities, and in some cases can be dangerous, especially for people of color. And that disconnection and that lack of compassion towards each other and understanding towards each other, and allowing everyone to be able to experience nature the way it's meant to be. It's so important to be able to have everyone experience that, so that we can build the generation upon generation of environmental stewards. You can't really understand the impact of something unless you experience it. So that's why it's super important. And then on top of that, we know that the communities that are going to be most negatively impacted are those from underserved communities, and mostly from they're going to look like me, So we need to be able to have people from diverse backgrounds to sit at the table and contribute and be experts. And that's my goal.
We're selfish. We all want to be rich, and we all want to create groups of other people that won't be rich. And Blacks are a convenient target. Poor people of any kind are a convenient target. And until we get over that selfishness and start realizing that we're managing this one incredibly beautiful and wonderful planet together, there's little hope. It's completely wrong.
I'm showing, this is from your book, by the way.
Yeah,
you all engage with students in some way or other at different levels. But Peter, so you were 16, I see here, when you say you found the species of farewell to spring. Well, how much does that early experience matter too? And this is, again, as a master educator at Black Rock Forest, Angie, I know, is working with kids at the earliest stages.
Within the United States, there's nothing more important than educating children and giving them a chance to build on their love of nature, which is probably already there. And by the way, since I've interrupted so often, I should add at this point a saying that I made up of myself. For a person of Irish heritage, not to interrupt you is to show a great lack of interest in what you're saying.
That's fantastic.
Hilary Callahan, what do you think of that?
I think that's pretty hilarious. I love this picture because I actually show pictures of Clarkia every time I teach about the species concept in botany. And when I teach a list of families, it usually is between 20 and 25 families that students have to understand to become sort of, upper level botanically literate. And I always use the Ona Gracie, this family and I always say, I'm like, one of the world's most famous botanists, Peter Raven, made his whole career on this family. But I also just love it because it's a great family for illustrating like a good family that you can tell that something's, fireweeds, the Clarkias, the evening primroses, and also as being someone who loves the mustard family, anything that has 4 petals is good in my book.
So are you okay with garlic mustard?
On the staff here has nearly completed a monograph of the entire mustard family. After having worked on it all his life, he's a wonderful person, and what he's accomplished has been incredible.
Well, I just want to say we'll call it a day right now, and maybe we can reconvene in another few months and just take this a little further.
What I think we all really want is we want Peter to come visit Black Rock Forest.
Yes, that would be amazing.
I'd love to.
Yes.
I'd love to.
Let's figure that out. And at the very least, we could take him on one of those 360 walks.
Oh, yeah.
But Peter, it would be great to get you back to the region here. You and Pat Raven, your wonderful wife, is she at home or not?
She is at home, and she helped me with the setup for this, and she helps me with every aspect of all my work. And I'm the luckiest guy on earth.
I'm just really glad that, you wrote a cool book. I'm always looking for like the next cool book for my students to assign. And, it's always good to have one that just came out and to also be able to say like, well, I know the guy who wrote this and he's a cool guy, but it is really good. And I think students, they think when they're studying science that is going to be all about, collecting data and crunching numbers and making observations. But I do always tell them like, and don't just read the science technical literature. I'm like, you should read about other people's careers, and you should read about other people's adventures, and you should read about other people's potentially oddball philosophies, and having a diverse audience. But it is nice to have somebody who has made such a mark to tell his own story. I really look forward to sharing it with my students too. So
likewise.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad we've been able to share some of this today on the Sustain What episode. So Sustain What is a frequent conversation at the intersection of complexity and consequence. And that's the world as we know it right now in this century for sure. Today's session focused on plants and our relationship with them and our relationship with each other. I think one of the takeaways here is that populated landscapes are as important as that thing we used to think of as nature out there. And it can be whether you're in a city or in the countryside, wherever you are, you can poke your head down to the ground level, find a plant and learn a little bit more about how it functions, or look at your plate and say, where did that come from? And make a little progress. Thanks for being here today. Hilary Callahan, Chair of Biology, Barnard College, and really part of what I consider the Earth Institute as anybody at Columbia.
Yeah, it's great having you doing all this work at Columbia, Andy. It's really great. And
Angie, can you hold up your flowers that you received for your?
Yes, thank you, Hilary.
Fantastic.
One of my PhD advisors. Beautiful.
Botanical Medal of Honor. And Peter Raven, my good friend for a long time, through hooray for all your conservation work and your love of the living world. And I use the word love with a capital L. It includes the species that too many people, I think, kind of don't like when they look in the mirror sometimes. So thank you all for being here today.
Andy, hooray for you too.
Yes.
It's great to meet you.
Yes,
and thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
A pleasure.
We are going to be